I hope you enjoyed that song. It's a little bit of a mixed song, though, right? It sings some things that I think we believe are true about ourselves. We have had some increase in courage and doing things in love in spite of our fear. But the song also things sings about some things that I think you and I aspire to. We're not quite there yet because the truth is some things that Jesus wants us to do cause some fear. So I expect by this point in our sheltering in place experience that you're aware of how many people have filed for unemployment here in our country. And it's sort of scary times for people, especially people who are losing their jobs or getting laid off or furloughed. And they have this burden of providing, and just it's very stressful. And I think what makes it additionally stressful for some of them is that they realize they may have to learn some new skills, new job skills. That they may have to venture into trying to do new jobs because of these major changes in how we're operating as a culture. And big changes, departures from our typical routine, that can be stressful and it can create worry and it makes you wonder how you're supposed to navigate your next move. And it reminds me of a little piece that Irma Bombeck wrote one time called School Worries, and it was about this young boy named Donald who was going to school for the very first time at 6 years old, and he is worried about all sorts of things. He's worried about his clothes, and what if they don't like his clothes, or what if his shoe gets untied and he has to tie it and then he forgets how to do it and people are watching. Um, he worries about where he's supposed to sit. What if he has to take his sweater off and somebody steals it? What if water gets splashed on his name tag and it fades and nobody knows what his name is? And he's just going to panic. So he is heading to his first day of school and he is obviously stressed out. He's worried. He has survived 6 years at home, but he's about to enter this new world of academia without his mom or his dad by his side. And he's worried about where to go and how he's going to need to act. He's worried about the, like, what I used to worry about. You're getting your food in the cafeteria, and can you really make it from that, tray row, that thing you slide your tray down and get to your table without dropping the stuff or the milk falling over on your tray and everybody laughing at you. Um, he's just not sure what he is supposed to do, especially when mom and dad are not there to tell him. Sometimes dramatic events like starting school are this venture into the unknown. And we get confronted with those questions of who will we be now? And what do I do now? I just got married. Who will I be now? How do I do this marriage thing? Or we lose a spouse to death or to divorce. And who will I be now? And what are my next steps? We become a parent. I remember bringing our firstborn, Joseph, home from the hospital after he was born. And we had read all the books. I had read, what to expect when you're expecting and these parenting books and went to parenting classes. And I remember distinctly taking him out of the car, bringing him into the house, and forgetting everything that I had read. I couldn't remember anything I was supposed to do. And so I figured we just sit here and stare at him until, something happens and it clicks. But you don't know what to do when you go into these uncharted waters here. And whether you're starting a new job or experiencing a worldwide virus and getting hit with these stay at home orders that can impact you financially, physically, emotionally, You're stepping into, or rather maybe even being launched into a new era of your life. And with all of the change, how do you now live? Well, a couple of weeks ago, you might have taken part in honoring the resurrection of Jesus. You celebrated Easter. And now we are in the sort of after Easter days. Well, Jesus's first followers had some after Easter days as well, right? In that brief time after the resurrection and before Jesus ascends into heaven, he reminds his followers of some important stuff as he knows they are heading into some uncharted waters. And so he talks about the need for community and loving your spiritual family. And that's stuff we talked about last Sunday. He talks about the need for forgiveness, the need to pray, to be filled with God's Spirit, and to stay in step with God's Spirit as he directs them. But right before he ascends into heaven, Jesus shares some final words with his disciples. Things are about to dramatically change, and like the boy Donald in Irma Bombeck's story, the disciples are worried and they're confused. Some of them are even doubting. And gathered up on that mountain in Galilee, Jesus told them, and you probably remember this, he looks at them and says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. And then he ascends into heaven. Now, kind of like Donald knows what to do when mom and dad are around to help him, I think the apostles sort of knew what to do when Jesus was physically around. And kind of the basic, at least bottom line, they knew, hey, we follow him and we do what he says. That seems to, be sort of the protocol here. Now what? He's left. And this is a new game for us now. We are in uncharted waters. And as they're heading into these uncharted waters, Jesus kind of hones it down pretty well for them. He gives them it's a pretty big, easy to remember bullseye. And it's literally one command. Jesus says, make disciples, followers. I want followers of me. And in the Greek, the original language there, this passage, there really is just that one command to make disciples. And it gets surrounded by these participles of going and baptizing and teaching. And so Jesus is saying, guys and gals, I'm not going to be here physically to hold your hand anymore, to tell you what to do. I am sending my Spirit, but you need to remember this. As disciples, here is your bullseye task. Make disciples. And how do you do that? You do it going, baptizing, teaching. In that baptizing, that's a one-time event where you identify with Jesus. It's a way that Jesus kind of asks his followers to basically sign on the dotted line, say, I'm in. And it is a point of contact with God's Spirit. It's tied to forgiveness and inclusion into this community of faith. But I'll just say this, if you want, we're not going to talk about baptism a lot, but if you want to be a follower of Jesus, if you want to identify with him, you need to do that. You need to get baptized, and that's straight from his mouth. But the focus, the command, is to make disciples. That's what Jesus wants his followers to remember as they're heading into uncharted waters, without him physically present as their captain. And as you and I are going through our lives with this new normal of physical distancing and staying home, Jesus still says, make disciples. Have that intention as you're going in however it is that you can go. The mission didn't change. or get put on hold because we got a shelter in place order. And so you and I are going to have to remember that, and we're going to have to be creative in how we sail out. When this pandemic hit, um, for us churchgoers, maybe some of our first questions regarding church and ministry were, how are we going to meet? How are we going to do church? And we were really kind of thinking about our Sunday morning experience. And I get that. I understand those sorts of questions. I had those same questions myself, and they are important questions to think through. And what I want us to remember is let's get to a place where we're asking, how do we continue to make disciples? Because that calling hasn't changed, even though our circumstances have. And it makes me think a little bit about Paul at the end of the book of Acts, as well as some other times in his life where he finds himself in prison. He's not getting to go out as long as he wears a mask. He can't go out at all. So he's got great restrictions on his going. But he always seems to find ways to connect with people and talk about Jesus. You and every current follower of Jesus is a product of people who have embraced Jesus's words that he spoke on that mountain 2,000 years ago. And there have been all sorts of cultural and spiritual barriers and obstacles that have tried to impede Jesus's commission. But followers of Jesus, through God's Spirit, have always found a way. And we won't all share Jesus in the same way. We're not all gifted the same, but ultimately, we all seem to be called to open our mouths and our lives in some way for Jesus. Shelter in place or not, we all reach out trying to get the good news of Jesus to our community. Because Jesus wants us to, and because people are worth it. Alice and I watched a movie a little while ago about a woman who was facing obstacles every bit as deadly as the coronavirus. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery, and her life early on was one of beatings and abuse and dehumanization. One time she was severely whipped for eating a sugar cube that she wasn't supposed to. Early on in her life, she was charged with the task of watching a slave owner's baby through the night, and if the baby woke up crying, then Harriet would be the one who would get beat for that. When she was around middle school age, she was on an errand at the local market, and while she was there, another slave owner got upset with one of his slaves and grabbed a metal weight and threw it at him, and he missed the young man but hit Harriet in her head and fractured her skull. And she would deal with seizures and headaches for the rest of her life because of that. That was also about the time, however, that she came to believe that this injury had created an opportunity for this special relationship for her to have with God. And she was becoming more and more interested in God and more interested in the Bible, but she couldn't read the Bible, so she would find other slaves who could read and have them read to her. And she loved these stories of Jesus and the things that he would do and the things that he would say. And she loved the stories of Moses, the deliverer. And she was said to have developed this passionate faith that showed itself in being compassionate and courageous for what was good and what was right. So she ended up trying to escape 2 times, but she got caught and she was punished. She eventually married, but her owner was about to break up her marriage by selling her to another owner. And so she decided to try and escape again. And this 3rd time she was successful. But after all of those experiences of the beatings and the abuse and the threats upon her life, Harriet chose to turn right back around and go back into the lion's den. Why? Because she wanted to help others be free as well. And so, month after month, year after year, she would personally put herself in harm's way to help others find life. And it wasn't too long before people began to call her Moses. Large rewards began to be put on her head. The rewards for her were much larger than even for John Wilkes Booth and the conspirators who had assassinated President Lincoln. She made 19 trips into slave territory to personally escort and free over 300 slaves through the Underground Railroad. During the Civil War, she was given command of some troops, and she liberated more than 700 slaves in South Carolina. And she laid her life on the line over and over so that others could have a chance to be free. And when she would be asked about that, when she would be asked, why do you do this? She would always say, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And so she risked herself again and again and found a way, in spite of the obstacles, to set the oppressed free. And that's the kind of passion I want us to have when I think about the people that live in our community, the people that are in our lives. Let's try to care that much. It's really interesting to me, given the circumstances that we're in now, some of the reports that I'm reading, some churches that are reporting online that they're growing faster than they ever have, and some of them haven't been growing. They've been declining, and yet now, because of the shelter in place, they're growing. And I'm not sure how they measure all that. But one thing that really stood out to me that I saw was this, when they talked about that communicating and having discussions about Jesus through a FaceTime or through a Zoom session might honestly be better received for a portion of the population out there now, because from them, where they sit, it just seems a little bit safer than them being invited to come to church. And this is just a little bit safer way for them to kind of stick their toe in the water. And I think that's great. And so we have to be creative and seek out ways to do that. One example, I hope you don't get upset with me, John, but for those of you who don't know, Phoebe Bordelon, who was baptized here in this box right behind me last year, and her husband was here for that, very supportive of her. But church is a little, not his thing right now. And nice guy, but I think he's had some bad experiences with church, just like a lot of people that we know have had. But Phoebe told me last week that since the sheltering in place, she's not sure if she'll ever get John to come to a church here with her, when we're able to get back together. But he is watching these messages with her now. And I love that. I'm so excited about that. John, I hope you will come here sometime. It's not going to change how we feel about you, man. We love you. We want you to be here. But that excites me, that you'll be able to, you're willing to watch these now. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. Let's be creative, even with our shelter in place orders, and figure out ways to get the good news of Jesus and freedom and life to people. Thanks again, you guys, for joining me here. God bless you.